all-knowing and all-powerful, starting with the elderly wolf uncle chapter 92. Then, Sif had already taken the opportunity to go around the back of the destroyer. For Asgard, she shouted, and the whole person jumped into the air, and the long sword in her hand bloomed with a dazzling golden divine light. Sif was the crown princess of the god king, Ahcc, Odin, and her long sword was blessed by the latter. Airplanes. Suddenly, a dense divine pattern shone on the long sword, and the blade flashed cold. Straightforward stabbed into the back of the destroyer. Clang! In the sound of gold and iron, Sif's long sword, with the blessing of the god king, barely broke through the defense of the destroyer and stabbed in. Pity. Sif's own strength is not strong, and after the long sword broke through the destroyer's defenses, it was directly stuck in the gap in the destroyer's body. Damn it. Seeing this, she couldn't help but scold secretly, and was about to increase the strength of her hand. But seeing that the original back was facing her destroyer, the iron armor on her body began to rotate according to each part, and it became facing her head-on. Rumble. The destroyer was not prepared to pity Xianxia in the slightest, and his big hands suddenly bombarded out. Sif was also blasted to the side of the three warriors of the Immortal Palace. Several people lay on the ground at the same time, their whole bodies were in pain, and they could not get up again. At this time, the destroyer took a step forward and approached several people, and the patterns on his body bloomed with more and more dazzling golden light. Immediately afterwards, those golden rays instantly gathered on its head. The terrifying tides of energy that were as terrifying as substance suddenly roared from the head of the destroyer, spreading out in all directions. Even the three warriors of the Immortal Palace and Sif as gods felt fearful. It is conceivable that when the other party breaks out, they will all die here. No resistance. Hey, Loki, what you call the wrath of the gods is just hiding behind a big toy and not daring to show up. It's really funny. Then, a voice rang out from behind the destroyer. The destroyer turned abruptly. Not far away, in the sky, there was a tall, well-proportioned figure flying. It was Chen Tian. Thor noticed him as well. Hey, friend, this guy is not something you Midgardians can mess with. If you still have to die, get out of there. Immediately, Thor shouted to Chen Tian. He knew that the destroyer came because of him, and if someone had an accident because of the destroyer, then felt that he was also responsible. But it was too late. Asgard Immortal Palace. Through the perspective of the destroyer, Loki saw Chen Tian's appearance, and also heard what the latter said. His whole face suddenly became fierce with anger, and his eyes were wide and he gritted his teeth. Damn the Midgards. He actually dared to anger the gods. Very good, I want you to see what true wrath of the gods is. Quote. Loki's words were almost squeezed out of between his teeth, as if he was angry to the extreme. Directly bombard the destroyer's rays and increase them to maximum power. Airplanes. On a desert town, red light began to appear all over the body of the destroyer, which was already terrifying enough, and it was even rising at this time. Endless energy suddenly converged into its face armor. The air within a radius of 100 meters had already begun to twist wildly because of the terrifying high temperature released by the destroyer. Look at the past from afar. The destroyer gathered the head of majestic energy, like a round of the great sun shining dazzlingly, bursts of energy ripples, terrifying to the extreme. Get out of the way. Seeing this scene, Thor increased the volume and roared. Next second, the destroyer's body leaned forward, and the mask armor opened. A terrifying red beam formed by the convergence of endless majestic energy burst out. The air everywhere the beam passed shook out of thin air. It was like a roaring angry dragon that exuded endless majesty, slamming towards Chen Tian. However, Chen Tian stood in place like this, his expression calm and motionless, seemingly not ready to dodge, ready to let the beam hit him. He knew that Loki would definitely seek revenge on himself. After all, this guy has more revenge than anyone. So the moment he saw himself, even Thor no longer cared, and directly let the destroyer rush at him. It's a pity. Chen Tian looked at the nearer and closer destroyer beam, not caring at all, and a smile was outlined at the corner of his mouth. Asgard Immortal Palace. Through the perspective of the destroyer, Loki looked at Chen Tian and was not ready to hide, feeling that the other party was really ignorant and ridiculous to the extreme. Hard connecting the beam of the destroyer is simply looking for death. This guy is an idiot. He laughed loudly with disdain. Next second, rumble. The destroyer's beam had already hit Chen Tian fiercely. The majestic and terrifying energy to the extreme burst out at this moment. Circles of air flowed and scattered, splashing countless rubble. The flames rolled and rose, and the extreme explosion was deafening. Even the ground was shaking violently, giving birth to dense cracks. Damn it. Thor raised his head, looked at the churning sea of fire in front of him, the dust and fog, and immediately cursed angrily. There are still people who are affected because of themselves. He couldn't be forgiven. However, just when all the residual power gradually dissipated, Thor's expression that was still excited before instantly stiffened on his face. He couldn't believe his eyes. That young man in Midgard was still flying in midair after suffering a devastating bombardment brewed to the extreme by the destroyer. How is it possible? The three warriors of the Immortal Palace and Sif, who understood the power of the destroyer, saw that Chen Tian not only stood still in place. Even the clothes were not wrinkled in the slightest, and they were also sluggish. If it weren't for the ground around the other party, it would have become fragmented and messy, and there was a smoke in the air that had not yet dissipated. They may even suspect that nothing has happened just now. Next second, the figure broke through the thick white smoke in front of him and came to the destroyer's oblique, overlooking the silver-white armor below. It is bathed in the scorching sun and has no wrinkled coat. There was a divine majesty between his eyebrows, and he was clearly a young man of 18 or 19 years old. But there is a sense of oppression that makes people subservient. And the teenager who liked to joke before, the judgment is like the two. He is now like a majestic Tarzan, looking down on everything. Chen Tian said slowly, Loki, you don't seem to be able to do this toy. Chapter